Sears. Welcome, and if you would state your name for the record before you begin, and commence when you're ready.
My name is Dr. Bob Sears. Thank you, members of the committee and Madam Chair. I am a licensed pediatrician. I grew up actually in Toronto, where my dad was a pediatrician at the Hospital for Sick Children. I was trained at Georgetown University School of Medicine to be a doctor, and I did my pediatric training at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. I give vaccines in my office every day, so I'm very well qualified to speak on this topic and in opposition to Bill 39. Exercising governmental police powers by requiring vaccines for all school children is problematic for three reasons. First, it is unnecessary. There is no health emergency, despite what people would have you believe. Second, it won't work because most vaccines don't prevent the spread of a disease, and most diseases aren't even spreading in schools anyway. And third, the vaccine schedule, which this bill requires you to enforce, has not been proven safe. I'm talking about the full vaccine schedule. Now, given what you've heard from the supporters of this bill, you probably think I'm crazy. But I will show you CDC and FDA data that prove that I'm correct, and I'm very honored that you'll allow me to speak. First, this law is unnecessary because there's no significant increase in diseases in this province or in Canada as a whole. There's no health emergency. Let's start with the measles epidemic that you've heard so much about. This year, there are 89 cases in Canada so far, and 12 cases in New Brunswick. Back in 2011, there were 750 cases of measles in Canada, and in 2014, there were 440 cases. In the last 3 years, there have been less than 50 cases each year, so there's no increase in measles. You also hear a lot about meningitis or meningococcal disease. A decade ago, there were about 200 cases each year in Canada. Now there are about 100 cases each year. There's no increase, and the majority of cases are in adults. There hasn't been a case of wild polio in North America in over 35 years. We've also eradicated diphtheria, and rubella and mumps is very uncommon. So there's no increase in these diseases. So let's get back to measles, because that's one of the biggest things we talk about. So contrary to what you have been told, measles was never actually fully eliminated from Canada, even though it's labeled as an eliminated disease. In 1998, when it was declared eliminated, there were 17 cases. Since then, there's never been a 0 year for measles. To claim measles was completely eliminated and is now back is misinformation. We define an eliminated disease as one that no longer persists continuously in a community. It's a disease that comes and goes in small outbreaks. Measles is actually still considered eliminated by that definition, but it was never gone and it's not coming back. Furthermore, measles is not a deadly disease for 99.99% of people who catch it. It is not a deadly epidemic that demands the extreme use of police powers. In truth, measles has an extremely low fatality rate, about 1 in 10,000 cases in a modern country. And I have the printout from the Centers for Disease Control to give you that demonstrates this low risk. So even a large outbreak is unlikely to cause any real harm. But you have heard that measles has a very high fatality rate, 1 in 500 or 1 in 1,000 cases, you may have heard. That's the fatality rate only among people who are sick enough to seek medical care or go to the hospital. Most people don't seek medical care because most cases are manageable at home. And back when everyone used to catch measles, over 90% of people didn't even see a doctor for it. The former chief medical officer from Ontario, Dr. Richard Shabbos, and Neil Rao, an infectious disease specialist, actually talked about measles in their October 2018 Globe and Mail article titled "Stop the Hysteria Over Measles Outbreak." They said the borderline hysteria fueled by the media and by public health that greets a few cases is unwarranted. I would like to pause for a moment and address what I think many of you might be thinking right now. The reason we rarely see measles is because of the vaccine. And I'm actually not arguing against that, because I agree with you in part. But it's a common strategy used by those who propose vaccine mandates is to label anyone who argues against mandates as being anti-vaccine. And we heard a lot of that this morning, with all due respect to the education officer. This way you won't listen to what we have to say. But we're really anti-mandate, not anti-vaccine. I'm not arguing against the vaccine at all. Instead, I'm showing you why we, as a people, don't need to make vaccines mandatory for school attendance. That is all. Choosing to vaccinate is a completely separate issue that belongs in the doctor's office. It's a decision between the doctor and the patient. This bill instead is about whether or not the New Brunswick government should employ police powers and make vaccines mandatory for school attendance. For you to be able to make this decision, it's important for you to understand why measles is continuing to circulate in Canada in small outbreaks and the United States. The number one reason is that our adult population is no longer immune to the disease. All adults used to be immune for life after catching the disease naturally as children. That gave our entire nation of adults effective natural herd immunity. But this last generation of adults who are naturally immune is passing on, and today's younger and middle-aged adults have no measles immunity because we skipped the disease and our vaccines have worn off. I have studies here that will show how outbreaks occur in older teens and adults who have been vaccinated. Almost every outbreak of measles is started by an adult, and many cases occur in adults. In the Disneyland outbreak in California, where I practiced in 2015, not one single case of measles was transmitted in any schools. Our California outbreak this year is mostly in adults, and again, it's not passing in schools. We see a similar trend in Canada. 70% of cases are in older children and adults. Even in the largest Canadian outbreak in 2011 in Quebec, half of the cases were in people 15 years and older, and some of these were vaccinated and the vaccines wore off or didn't work. This is why mandating vaccines for school attendance won't stop these small outbreaks of measles. Even if every school child has the vaccine, there are simply too many adults in school as well, as some of you have stated, and in every city who can catch and spread measles, and we will continue to have these outbreaks. Kicking the few kids who don't vaccinate out of school won't change this. I want to discuss a second disease that those who are pushing for mandates nationwide are declaring it as a state health emergency, whooping cough, or otherwise known as pertussis. I agree that whooping cough is a national problem. It can be very serious for newborn babies. We do tragically have between 1 and 4 fatalities from whooping cough every year in Canada. And we do have more whooping cough now than we did before. But this particular disease and vaccine proves my second point. Mandatory vaccination laws won't work. There's a common belief that vaccines magically do two things. They prevent you from feeling sick from a disease, and they prevent the spread to others. Now, most vaccines help with the first part of that. You feel less sick, and that's what we mean by vaccine being effective. But most vaccines actually don't keep you from catching the germs and spreading the germs to others. I'm not talking just because the vaccine doesn't work. I'm saying some vaccines aren't even designed to work that way at all. So vaccinated people benefit individually, but most injected vaccines only give us immunity in our bloodstream. The infectious germs will still enter our GI or our respiratory tract, replicate, and then pass on to others. So a vaccinated person will still develop symptoms and be contagious in many cases. This is true of the flu vaccine, the meningitis vaccine, the diphtheria vaccine, the tetanus vaccine, our whooping cough vaccine, and even our current polio vaccine. So therefore, such vaccines offer no public health benefit, and mandating those ones in schools won't change anything. What is scientifically irrefutable is that the whooping cough vaccine does not reduce whooping cough cases. For the reasons I just talked about. And the FDA did a study, which I'll give you, in 2013 that clearly demonstrates the vaccine only makes you feel less sick. But you still catch the germs, stay contagious, and pass the infection on to others just as easily as those who are not vaccinated. And if you are not vaccinated and catch the disease, you generally will only catch it once. If you're vaccinated and catch the disease, you can keep catching it later on and keep spreading it around. And I quote from the study, "The observation that the vaccine fails to prevent colonization or transmission is a plausible explanation for the resurgence of pertussis." This is from our own FDA. And the CDC agrees and says unvaccinated kids are not the driving force behind these large pertussis outbreaks. Study after study, which I'll give you, make it very clear that the current pertussis vaccine is insufficient to prevent outbreaks. And they wear off too soon. And even when they are effective, it only makes you cough less. It doesn't make you not contagious. In California, when we had a large outbreak, 90% of the kids who caught pertussis were vaccinated. And I'll give you a study at a school in Los Angeles last year. 70 vaccinated kids caught whooping cough, and the 18 unvaccinated kids at the school did not catch whooping cough, which is very ironic. And how are you doing here in your province? Well, you had 12 people catch whooping cough earlier this year, and some of those cases were vaccinated. There's a new study that I'll show you from the grandfather of pediatric infectious disease medicine in America, Dr. Cherry out of UCLA, the most well-respected infectious disease pediatric specialist. He published a study earlier this year that I'll give you that show numerous studies have shown the deficiencies of pertussis vaccine, and that he found something called linked epitope suppression. It's very complicated. I'll try to really simplify it. It said it really means all children who are given the DTaP vaccine will be more susceptible to pertussis throughout their lifetimes, and there's no way to decrease this lifetime susceptibility if you're given that vaccine. So this bill would require you to mandate a medical treatment that might even make the spread of whooping cough worse. Again, I'll give you the studies. The fact is there's no public health benefit from this vaccine and several others. The disease will spread through a fully vaccinated school, and when it does spread through school, it's not deadly to children. It's very serious for newborn babies, but this bill will not prevent the spread occasionally to newborn babies. Therefore, you can talk about our problems with whooping cough all day and how important the vaccine is for people to consider, but that won't change the fact that vaccination status won't decrease disease outbreaks for whooping cough and some other diseases. A law which makes this vaccine mandatory for school, let's skip that. With all due respect, ladies and gentlemen of this committee, if you don't question the author of this bill about this fact and demand a satisfactory answer as to why they're mandating vaccines like this, then you aren't doing your job, again, with all due respect. A law that mandates unvaccinated children must stay home and labels children whose parents embrace a natural approach to their medical care as unclean, unsafe, and unsuited to be allowed in public school is a most restrictive and inappropriate use of police powers. We in the U.S., in the United States, have tragically done that before to some groups of our people for unfair and unjust reasons, as other nations have done in the past and some still do today. We wrongly forced some people into separate but equal schools so long ago. This bill won't even provide separate but equal public school. It provides no public school. Discrimination is wrong every time. An essential requirement for any law that infringes directly on the rights of a portion of your citizens is that the status quo isn't working, that what's currently in place isn't working. If, on the other hand, the status quo is working and there is no danger, then it is your duty to not overstep your bounds and enact extreme measures upon those who have elected you. The status quo of voluntary immunization and proper quarantine measures have helped keep measles and all other diseases under control in your province. There's no emergency. It's not enough to simply think vaccines are good so we can mandate them. There needs to be a reason. This brings me to my third point as to why many citizens are asking you to not support this bill. Besides the fact that mandating the vaccine schedule is unnecessary and won't reduce many diseases, the fact that the schedule which you propose to mandate has not been proven to be safe and will harm some children should matter greatly to you, and I know it does. Before you accuse me of saying vaccines are unsafe, let me clarify, please. I didn't say vaccines are unsafe. I said the current schedule of vaccines has not been proven to be safe. The Institute of Medicine is one of the most authoritative bodies of researchers. They looked at all available data 6 years ago to try to prove that vaccines are safe and that the schedule is safe. They concluded that the schedule has not been proven to be safe. I quote, "Studies designed to examine the long-term effects of the cumulative number of vaccines have not been conducted. Existing research has not been designed to test the entire immunization schedule. The committee has found a paucity of information that addresses the risk of adverse events with the complete recommended immunization schedule." But you hear it all the time, vaccines are safe and effective. But what does that mean? It means individually and in some combinations, they have passed the FDA safety approval process. But like all medical products, vaccines undergo this kind of safety testing, and the Institute of Medicine supports this. They're not saying individually vaccines are dangerous, they're saying they just haven't studied the short-term or the long-term risks of the complete schedule. So those who support mandates, they can say vaccines are safe all day long, but there's not a single scientist in the world that can show you that the complete schedule of vaccines is safe. As elected officials, you have the opportunity to send a clear message to your citizens and your medical policy makers that you hold yourselves to the highest standards of scientific integrity. And a complex medical intervention that involves injecting every child with the 30 doses that are mandated now, you asked, and the additional 30 more doses that are currently optional but could be mandated later. This cannot, by any reasonable, ethical, moral, or medical standard, be mandated or coerced as a condition for school entry without safety testing. It's for these reasons that so many oppose this unnecessary bill. And I'm going to close by addressing what the Minister of Education, again, great respect for him, he said we need to stay within the 95% vaccination coverage, otherwise the system starts to fall apart. This statistic of 95% comes from a 1983 study called Measles and Rubella in the United States, and I'll give you that study. This study, the 95% statistic from the study only applies to measles. It doesn't apply to all the other things we vaccinate against, only measles. Yet you hear the 95% used for the entire schedule, for every disease. There's no research that supports that whatsoever. This study only looked at measles for 95%. Number two, this study was a mathematical simulation published by a professor of mathematics. It wasn't an actual medical study using real people or using huge populations of people. We would assume that if they're going to claim we need 95%, that they've proven, say, 94% doesn't work, 92% doesn't work, but 96% does in a live population of people. There's no such research that I can find. Except this one 36-year-old mathematical simulation. And I would ask you to ask the Chief Medical Officer if they have such research to show you. So thank you, members of the committee, and I welcome your questions. And I've given you copies of every study I've talked about. I've highlighted the main parts. I've given you my curriculum vitae. I've given you a summary of my testimony points. And I greatly appreciate you giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
I will ask that all applause, that we refrain from applause for all future presentations. It will only cut into the time that are allowed for presenters. I'll also remind everyone that we have, that the presentation should be broken down into 30-minute segments. I acknowledge that the last presenter did go over. I accept responsibility for that. We will try and keep people on a schedule because there are certain expectations, and these guidelines were designed by the committee as a whole. That being said, I believe we have about 12 minutes left for questions, and we will try and keep them to be divided equally between all parties represented here today. And so I ask my colleagues, go ahead, yes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je vais poser mes questions en français. Non, vous pouvez mettre votre... travail. Ici, au Nouveau-Brunswick, on est la seule province au Canada qui reconnaît officiellement les deux langues, donc le français et l'anglais.
We call this technical difficulties, so we'll give you some grace here.
Ouais, non, il n'y a pas de...
No.
OK, est-ce que ça fonctionne bien? OK. Premièrement, j'aimerais vous souhaiter la bienvenue à l'Assemblée législative. J'ai l'impression que vous êtes venu de loin là, pour être ici avec nous cet après-midi. J'ai juste quelques questions parce que je vais donner la chance à tout le monde sur le comité de pouvoir poser des questions. Je suis un peu confus parce que vous dites que dans votre pratique, vous donniez des vaccins, mais vous êtes contre le projet de loi 39. Pouvez-vous expliquer plus en détail? Je pense que la question que je vais poser, est-ce que vous êtes contre les vaccins ou vous êtes seulement contre le projet de loi 39 qui est présenté ici, là?
Against the vaccines, and I do give them in my office every day. I am only against mandatory vaccines or coerced vaccines.
Okay. Merci. Le présentateur avant vous a mentionné qu'en Californie, les vaccins sont maintenant obligatoires. J'ai lu à quelque part que la commission médicale de la Californie vous a mis en probation. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer pourquoi que vous avez reçu ou que vous avez été mis en probation?
Yes, thank you for asking. I was put on probation by the California Medical Board for writing a letter to a judge in a custody dispute. A baby had a very severe neurological reaction to his vaccines, and the parents stopped vaccinating. And then 3 years later, they were divorced, and the father wanted to ask a judge to force the resumption of vaccines. And I saw the child for the first time. At that point, he was 3, and I judged that his reaction was so severe that the mom was correct in not wanting to continue vaccines. And so I wrote an opinion letter to the judge saying, I agree with the mom, this child should not continue vaccines because of his earlier reaction. And the judge upheld my decision. The judge found me correct. The Medical Board of California didn't like my decision because they judge that you should only opt out of vaccines if you, number one, went into a coma and suffered severe permanent brain damage, or number two, you went into immediate anaphylactic shock and almost died and your life had to be saved. That's what the Medical Board of California judges as a valid reason. I disagree as a physician. I think anyone with a severe reaction should have the right to opt out of vaccines. So then they put me on probation for that.
Est-ce qu'il y avait une possibilité de faire appel à cette punition avec la commission médicale de la Californie?
Yes, there is an appeal. Actually, we never went to trial. They never actually found fault. They offered me a settlement of probation instead of taking me to trial. And I accepted the settlement of probation. And because even if I went to trial and won, the medical board could still put me on probation. That's how our California system worked. So I accepted their offer without ever going to trial, and I had no admission of fault.
Okay. Est-ce que vous prévoyez retourner à votre pratique une fois que la probation se termine?
Oh, so my probation, I'm continuing to practice full-time as I always have. Okay. My practice is monitored by a doctor who looks at some of my medical records to make sure I'm following the standard of care.
Est-ce que le fait qu'ils vous ont mis en probation, est-ce que ça a changé votre opinion sur la vaccination?
No, it does not change my opinion.
OK. Vous avez mentionné dans votre introduction qu'une des raisons que vous êtes contre le projet de loi 39, c'est que vous considérez qu'il n'y a pas d'urgence médicale présentement. Donc, il n'y a aucune nécessité pour la vaccination. Pourtant, évidemment, je ne suis pas un homme de science, mais pourtant, la vaccination a réussi à éradiquer les maladies. Puis, me semble, selon mon point de vue, c'était plus un moyen de prévention pour empêcher justement ces maladies-là de revenir. Est-ce qu'on devrait voir la vaccination comme un moyen de prévention ou est-ce qu'on devrait attendre que justement il y ait un problème, ensuite réagir, selon vous?
Well, I didn't say that vaccines are unnecessary. I said a mandatory law is unnecessary. Just to clarify, but you are right. Vaccines do help prevent the spread of some diseases. And some diseases might increase if too many people stop vaccinating, but we are so much better at medicine and public health and sanitation and nutrition now that we handle diseases way better now than we did 100 years ago. And even the chief medical officer of one of the other provinces said that this measles hysteria is unwarranted. He even said we would probably have to go about 100 years before we saw anyone die of wild measles in Canada due to the current conditions. We're just better at medicine and health now. Okay. So that's why I don't think we'll have a significant problem with diseases.
For the sake of time management, we're going to allow the other parties to ask some questions. If there's time remaining, we'll return.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Sears, you currently reside in California. You're an American citizen?
Correct.
Okay. How did you know to come here today? Who invited you?
One of the residents here invited me by email.
A resident of New Brunswick?
I believe she lives in New Brunswick. She's a Canadian. Stephen? New Brunswick? Yes. Okay.
And who paid for you to get here?
Well, I'm not being paid to get here at all.
Who paid for your plane ticket?
Right. Vaccine Choice Canada offered to pay for my plane ticket, and I'm losing 3 days of work time to be here, which is several $1,000s of income that I'm happily sacrificing. This is a very important issue for you guys to look at.
I'm an elected official in the province of New Brunswick. I don't go to the Republic of California to go speak to their state legislature on issues that matter to the American people. I would posit that if I were to go to an American state legislature and give them opinion on how they can run their state, I'd be shown my way to the border pretty quickly. So for you to come and talk about a police state, which is an American term, to talk about the FDA, which is your drug administration, not Canada's, this is Health Canada, I find that offensive. There is a question. So my question is this. You said you were not anti-vax, but against a police state. Why was most of your commentary about anti-vaccination?
I believe, and with all due respect to you, and again, thank you for your questions and your comments, because I came here because there are very few doctors who are willing to speak out against mandatory vaccination laws. Our medical licenses are threatened, our reputation is threatened, but for me, it's extremely important. And I apologize, for the characterization about a police state. This is a very personal issue for me because California has become that way, and I'm trying to help other countries and provinces, maintain, their freedoms. And so I apologize. What was your question?
So my question was, why did you spend most of your commentary about anti-vax position rather than about people's individual rights and freedoms, which is what you said is the purpose of your being here today?
Correct. Well, my entire commentary was about anti-mandatory vaccination, and you are hearing a lot from the pro-mandatory vaccination side already. You heard this morning, and you're going to hear later this afternoon, so we felt, it was important to hear from a doctor, a practicing pediatrician who gives vaccines, as to why vaccines might be important, but why they don't need to be and they shouldn't be mandated for school attendance. That's all.
Well, I can tell you that I was part of a group of people. I was born in 1971, and in New Brunswick, the requirement for vaccinations was scaled back. I didn't get vaccinated when I was born in 1971 or any subsequent time thereafter. I got chicken pox. I was hospitalized for it. I did have double pneumonia. I did get German measles. I did get red measles. I did get whooping cough. And I will tell you that my health issues that I still have today, 1/3 of my lung tissues are unusable because of scarring from multiple bouts of pneumonia. So I would suggest that my particular health situation is as a result of not having access to a vaccine.
Mr. Savoy,
now,
is
that
there
being
a question?
said, Madam Chair, I have the floor. I will ask a question when I'm ready.
Well, your time has actually
So
expired.
I will
Your time has
ask my
actually
question.
expired. If you have a question, I will indulge you to ask the question.
Do you know Canadian law and how it works in this country concerning mandatory vaccinations? It's obviously done in Ontario. Do you know of any Supreme Court challenge to the mandatory law that's in Ontario?
I do not.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. DeSonia?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for appearing here today. You said earlier that there's no major outbreaks in Canada. You may very well be right, but that could be attributed to an effective vaccine program in Canada, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And I just have one other quick question. How many legal processes or how many times have you been implicated legally in your professional career?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
Have you been involved in more legal disputes aside from the one that you were under probation for right now? Are there any other legal processes that you were going through down in the States?
There are. Thank you for asking. Yes, I'm undergoing 4 more legal processes with the California Medical Board, all based on writing letters of exemption from vaccines. Again, because the California Medical Board, like I said before, only says you should write exemptions if you went into a coma with severe brain injury or went into anaphylactic shock and nearly died. I've written medical exemptions for people who have had temporary nerve injuries or less severe allergic reactions and other medical problems directly related to vaccines. And as a doctor, as Canadian doctors can now, I believe, make such judgments when you have a bad vaccine reaction. The Medical Board of California thinks differently, and that's why they are continuing to pressure me over this issue, as they would possibly in other states or other provinces that restrict their exemptions to medical reasons only. Thank you for asking.
Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sears.
Thank you.